Hey soccer friends, I just want to give a shout out to our partner, Team Player. They are changing the game on how you find the perfect soccer team for your player. Parents, this means no more endless social media scrolling to find information on teams. With Team Player, everything you need to know is just a few clicks away. It's simple, straightforward, and lets you find the best coach and team for your player without any of the usual headaches. And coaches, we all know how tough it can be to get your team noticed, but when you subscribe to one of Team Player's team plans, you instantly get access to set up an online team profile that allows you to reach more potential players and showcase what your team is all about. It's super easy and lets players and parents see why your team could be the right fit for them. And if you sign up using the promo code PITCH, you can try any team plan free for 1 month. So whether you're managing a team or searching for one, come on over to www.teamplayer.us. That is TEAMPLAYR.US. And come give Team Player a look. Family-owned Soccer Innovation is your go-to source for top quality equipment. Whether you're a player, a supportive family member, or a dedicated coach, they have everything you need to elevate your game. For players, their innovative equipment are designed to boost your skills and performance on the pitch. From their agility cones to their portable goals, they have you covered. And family members, they offer durable equipment that's built to last because we know your support is critical to your player. Coaches, trust me, they can provide the equipment you need to run effective training sessions and shape the next generation of soccer players. Visit Soccer Innovations at soccerinnovations.com to start elevating your game with them. And if you use the code PITCH, PITCH, you can receive up to 10% off your next order. Hello and welcome back to Chat by the Pitch. This is Ian Babcock, your host. As I have been planning out my episodes for a while, this topic is near and dear to my heart, mostly because I myself have high anxiety and I suffer from depression. And having our young athletes be put under so much pressure at a young age, then going through their sporting career, doesn't matter what sport they're playing, always having that high pressure put on them to be successful. Doesn't matter if we're putting it on or if it's self-imposed or the coach. Mental wellness is so important for all of our athletes. And I think this is one topic that will be done several times throughout my career doing this podcast, if not at least once a year, along with a few other topics. And I think that if we spend time with our players to help them build them up and make them stronger and take the insight that Tyler shared with us. So let's start this chat and head to the pitch. Disclaimer, this podcast provides informational content only and does not replace professional mental health services, diagnosis, or treatment. If you are someone or you know someone in crisis, please contact your local emergency service or the National Suicide Prevention Line at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255 in the United States. The host and the guest are not responsible for outcomes of actions taken based on information discussed. Listeners' discretion is advised, and we encourage seeking appropriate professional assistance for mental health concerns.
I am Dr. Tyler Held. I am a certified mental performance consultant with my doctorate in sport and performance psychology. My personal background in sports is actually through the equestrian industry. As a youth and young rider, I wanted to be the best that I could in the sport, and I struggled with a lot of anxiety related to competition and ended up actually working with a sport and performance psychologist as a youth athlete, which was my introduction to it. And through my journey in sports and in life, I always came back to mindset and how important it is to know how you think about things and be able to manipulate your thoughts, because that really helps change your emotions. And so I did a lot of things in the equestrian industry. I got my master's degree in sport and performance psychology in 2019, decided I wanted to take it all the way to the doctorate. So I finished that last winter in 2022. And throughout the journey, my other sport that I've fallen in love with is actually Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Um, and I view that as my re-entry into sports competition with a new sports psychologist perspective, mindset, kind of my fresh start. So I actually own a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym. I run a kids and youth program there. So I have a lot of sort of experience on both sides of being a mental performance consultant and also coaching youth and kids myself. And I work with all athletes, all sports. Those are just kind of my personal expertise areas.
All
Yep.
sports at the end of the day are individual sports. I don't care if you're playing on a team or not. It is, am I doing better today than tomorrow? And with your background with a sport that predominantly is, and the one that you've fallen in love with now, are predominantly individual sports that are can be team sports, from my understanding, as a collective. How do you prepare these athletes to start with a mindful mindset before they even do anything? Because I feel even in soccer, there is a regiment of trying to get to that point of just walking onto the pitch or walking onto the mat, whatever it may be. How do you start the process of teaching mindfulness to an athlete?
Yeah, so let's start with just a basic definition of mindfulness, because I feel like that's a term that gets thrown out a lot in pop psychology, sports psychology, what have you. And the best definition that I can give of mindfulness is moment to moment, non judgmental awareness. It's being where you are, doing what you're doing without judging yourself. And I feel like that judgmental piece is probably one of the hardest things to overcome in sports, because you're inherently being judged, right? There's a scoreboard, there's an opponent, there's the drive to win. And so as soon as you're not living up to the expectations of, I feel like I'm dominating this match, I feel like I'm dominating this game, it's hard to bring yourself back into the present moment and have that awareness, have that mindfulness. One of the simplest things that I do for any athlete to elicit sort of that sense of mindfulness is to do a simple grounding exercise when you're starting your activity. Go through all of your senses. What are three things that you see? What are three things that you hear? Can you wiggle your toes inside your shoes? Can you like brush your hand on the grass, or for my equestrian athletes, take a nice pet on your horse? Something that really brings us back into our body, because a lot of what happens with maladaptive mindsets in sport performance is it's either something that's happened in the past that we're thinking about and we're ruminating about, and we're saying, oh, I hope I don't make that mistake again, or it's something that we're worried might happen in the future, right? I'm worried I might lose this game. I'm worried that opponent seems stronger, faster, better than me. And so all of that stuff takes us steps and steps away from mindfulness. So anything that can draw us to the present moment, paying attention, really being in our own skin. A lot easier said than done.
Always easier said than done when it comes to the mental side of anything. Um, Now, I really like what you talked about the rounding exercise. I think that's such an easy thing for an athlete to do, going through those simple motions and finding that. Now, mindfulness also comes into play with I can't pronounce the word right now.
Visualiz-
Visualization. There
yep.
we go. And when you're working through that and you're talked about those rounding exercises, that's going through some of those processes. So how can they bring visualization? My goodness. I'm dyslexic. I have a speech impediment.
You can use imagery. Imagery is another.
Thank you. When you're working with imagery and mindfulness, how do you combine the two to start the process of building the mindfulness, to building mental toughness side, because I think, like you said, it's a stage process and it's not something you just do overnight. You talked about this exercise, but now you have the imagery side of it to bring into the equation. How does it correlate now with bringing it full circle into the mental toughness side of the equation?
Yeah. So if you think about what I just said about mindfulness and us either being fixated on something that happened in the past or worried about something that might happen in the future, imagery or visualization is something that gives us this really cool tool. Basically, your mind gym, right? I think that that's a pretty commonly used term in the space of mental performance. Of hey, like you have to have your fortitude, your mind gym, to be able to go to a quiet space and make things happen in your brain, right? To me, if you can't execute a skill using imagery or visualization, how do you expect yourself to execute that skill in a game, in a performance? And so I I deal with a lot of athletes that are worried, right? They're worried they're going to make a mistake. They're worried they're going to slip up. They're worried they're going to fail. So I do imagery on what ifs, right? If this is going to happen, how am I going to cope with it? How am I going to respond to it? How am I going to manage my emotions in response to it? And how can I kind of work through all those little pieces of prevention, right? If I'm worried that I'm going to miss a shot, how do I prevent it? How do I get back in my body and say, here are the three focus cues and points that help create success for me? I know that when I do X, Y, and Z, I'm successful. And then I'm rehearsing that in my brain. And the really, really cool thing about imagery, about visualization, is they've done a bunch of fMRI studies that actually show us that our brains don't know the difference between rehearsing a skill in our head and actually doing the thing. And so I think a lot of people here, oh, use imagery to get yourself in the zone. And they think you're just supposed to think about how everything's going to be perfect and how wonderful you are and how positive you are. And don't get me wrong, there is a time and a place for that. But personally, I like to use this skill to just squash down any fear, any doubt, any uncertainty that I have uh, of myself and say, I will be able to cope with that bad call. I will be able to cope with that missed shot. I will be able to bounce back from it and strike back harder because the fear, anxiety takes me out of the present moment. Knowing that I'm going to be able to handle that really bad thing, that helps me really soar through and work through the setbacks that are inherent to sports.
I think you touched on the biggest one there. Going back to your definition of mindfulness, being in the
Yep.
present with no judgment, and then accepting the present as it is and moving on. That visual imagery is not just being everything's hunky dory, we live in a perfect world, everything's just going to go as we want. It is accepting failure in the present. And I think as parents, like I'm coming from a parent's perspective first, it's very hard for parents to say you missed the shot. And
Yep.
I've interviewed so many coaches, and I interviewed a coach recently, and he was telling me, it's like he would go to his son who was 10 years old, and as he got older, the conversation it was no longer of I know you need to make that shot. It's like I have to make that shot. The player did,
Yep.
and his son ended up playing at the very high level of the English Premier League, and he was saying it was not that I had an expectation. I said I did not expect him not to fail. It was holding himself to a standard that it's okay to make these mistakes, but I need to strive to make the correct shot. I have really trying to taking the word out of my vocabulary when working with both of my kids. My son's 9, my daughter's 5, of the word perfect.
Yep.
Um, it's everything is done correctly. I was sitting at a private session with my son, and the coach says, "There's no such thing as perfect. There's only doing things correct." And my wife made a comment to my son saying that he had the most perfect shot she's ever seen, and he goes, "Mom, it wasn't perfect. Everything was done correctly to have that shot." as a dad, I was very proud with him because he understood what I was trying to get through with him. But he also, it was to the point that he took it literally, that like
Yep.
nothing is, it's just doing things correct. And
Yep.
as parents, I think we emphasize you have to have so many goals in a game. You have to make every tackle. You have to be the ultimate athlete on whatever the pitch, the diamond, the gridiron, the mat, whatever it may be. Um, and as parents, we need to step back. So how do you advise parents to be more, I guess the word be forgiving and just looking for correctness over perfection? Because I feel like with athletes, we can teach the athlete all this stuff, but if they're surrounded by the coach and the parent, which have the two greatest influence, especially at a young age, or even in the professional world, they tend to have a harder time letting go of the miss or the missed tackle, or in any sport, the mistakes that happen along the way. And how do you advise parents then to be part of this equation with their athlete then?
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that you bring that up, because when I do work with youth athletes, I tend to involve the parents very heavily in my interventions, right? Because I can sit and I can tell the kid the right thing to think and do. But if you have a parent that's only praising results over effort, it can become very challenging, very difficult. So I want to back up and kind of talk about that perfectionism piece for a little bit, because I feel like perfectionism is something that's plaguing our society, right? Even so, I'm 29. In my generation, the perfectionism, it's so like that was the expectation, right? You have to be perfect, get perfect grades, do perfectly in everything that you do, so that you can have a perfect life. And that I call myself a recovering perfectionist all the time, because there are good things about perfectionism, right? You're highly motivated, you have a strong work ethic, committed to goals, like you want to learn and improve, but it's such a fragile mindset to work out of. You can lose your confidence so quickly. And really, the biggest thing that I find that's associated with perfectionism is something that we call a low frustration tolerance. Like, I can't tolerate when things are going wrong because it doesn't fit into my perfect view of the world, right? And so when you get the parents that are just praising goals and saying, good job, you scored that goal, your child makes the connection that, athletic success means love. And when I am athletically talented, I don't feel like there's space to make a mistake, right? And so then you have a kid that has a bad game, because let's face it, we all have bad days. All of a sudden, there's this conflict inside of them, because we've always praised effort, like success over effort, right? Like, oh, it doesn't matter how you play as long as you're scoring the goals, as long as you're, making the right decisions, making the right push, being aggressive, um and the conflict that comes from that is really, really difficult to cope with. And as we're looking at these youth athletes as well, you're not at an age where you draw cause and effect so strongly as adults, right? Like, as adults, we cognitively are able to process our emotions, our actions, our reactions. Kids don't really know where their emotions are coming from all the time, right? They can't say, I feel bad today because I played bad and my dad just wants me to score goals and I didn't score any goals today. Like, they don't realize that. They just feel crappy. So it's a really difficult thing to do. But what I always educate parents about is what we call task versus ego orientation. So a task oriented athlete is very invested in the process of getting better, right? It's not, I want to score goals today. It's, to score goals, I'm working on this specific technical aspect of my game. I'm working on this specific aspect of my athleticism to improve. I'm getting really deep about the things that make me successful, instead of just having this overarching idea that goals mean success. So the ego oriented athlete is really just focused on results, right? I want to look good to other people. I want to have that score on the scoreboard. I want to feel like I'm dominating and playing well. And what we know from our sports research is that ego oriented athletes really struggle when things go wrong. A task oriented athlete is going to take mistakes and grow and adapt and become a better athlete in the long run. And I think that's also like a huge generational problem that we're having where, we're forced to go into the specialization of sports from such a young age, right? Like if you want to play soccer, you need to play soccer year round and be strength and conditioning and all this stuff and just soccer, 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 soccer. And again, that's fine, but when that space is there and you're just drilling and you're just working so hard, your identity also blends in with your athletic performance. So now you've got all these areas of perfectionism and our identity and fear of making mistakes, and it's a really hard place to work out of. So I encourage parents to learn about task orientation versus ego orientation and praise their kids on what they're doing that's completely within their control, right? Not good job, you got the goal. Tell them something that they did, that they could control, that made the goal happen. And it's such a slight tweak, but it makes so much of a difference because if you say, oh, you got a goal, how? How was I in control of that? Right. And I think that control word is very large, right? If things are ambiguous and outside of my control and I'm facing all my self-worth on that, I'm not going to be able to focus. I'm not going to be able to operate. But if I can go back into, wow, I scored a goal because we had a really good passing sequence leading up to it, and I was jiving with all my teammates, and I got to the right place, and I used that technique I've been practicing in practice. All of a sudden, that makes sense. I am in control of my future. I am in control of my success. I know that was a lot. Did that make sense?
Makes perfect sense because I feel like I can relate it to my kids because this is and who we watch. So in our house, we always with my son when he played soccer, I'll use him because he's my primary example for everything because my daughter's only 5. My son was very much, we challenged him not for goals because every kid wants goals. Goals is the byproduct of doing something successful.
Yep.
So we would give him a salary, air quotes salary, when he would play in games. So his salaries weren't based on goals. They were the thing that was worth the least because you can't always control that. But you can control how well you pass the ball, how well you play defense, how well you stop, how well you do a good control touch with the ball. There's all these small little things that he can do as an individual that does not really affect or has an effect from someone else coming into the equation.
Yep.
But he can control. So if he makes a great pass and someone scores a goal from his great pass, we gave him X amount of money. I mean, all these were worth around 5-10 cents a piece. They weren't extravagant amount of money, but he could earn something. But
Yep.
goals were worth the least amount. An assist was worth quite a bit because he was part of the process, teammate. And for us, that was something we learned very on from watching parents around us. It's just wanting their kids to have goals. Well, mom, I'll be honest, was a very great young player. Now he's getting a little bit older, and the athleticism is catching up with all the other kids now. He has to rely more on his technical side of the game. And I think parents are so worried about this little part of the game, the technical side, now that because your athleticism can only take you so far, now you have to work on the personal technical side. That you see these kids do all these fancy little moves down the field, but they're doing it at the wrong moment.
Yep.
And parents are putting such an emphasis on it. It's we talk about it with our son, like you can't use these skill sets. You have to practice these skill sets at home so you can go practice them in your training sessions with your team, and then you can go game. And he's getting to the point where he's realizing what we're saying. It's like you used to do all these things because you were taught them in practice. You practice them in practice and training. And now you're moving to, you have to do it at home. And it's finding that encouragement to eliminate the word perfection from the equation, like you were talking about, and putting it onto him saying, like, we just want you to do these things correctly at the right moment. Going back to what we were talking about before we started, was Johann Cruyff has a quote: anyone can juggle a soccer ball 10,000 times, 1,000 times. But a real athlete can pass the ball at the right moment to the correct foot in the right moment. And it's a pile on, and it's teaching our players to, and I butchered that quote, everyone who's listening to this that knows it. But it's talking about, it's not about doing things repetitively over and over and over again. It's about doing it in the moment. And it goes back to that mindfulness. And I think this is where parents need to understand is they may make the correct pass at the right moment to the correct foot, to the right, at the right angle, at the right speed, but their teammate botched it.
Yep.
And that teammate now that passed the ball might not pass to that teammate again because they gave them everything on a silver platter and they botched it. Because we expect perfection, and so our players expect perfections from their teammates. And this is where I think parents have a very strong driving role, and is that I call it the drive of shame home, because parents will sit in the car and berate their players for 15 minutes, however long the drive is home, and not talk about anything they did successfully. And it
Yep.
butchers that mindset, and it butchers the imagery, and then it butchers the confidence and that task versus ego.
Yep.
So as a parent, coaches want a player with a strong ego, but as a parent, we want our players to be very task. So how do you learn to teach these players to be task versus ego? Because I feel as a parent, or some parents are purely want their kids to have an ego versus the task, like wanting to constantly improve, but they don't care about showboating. I always use the distinction between Messi and Ronaldo
Yep.
in worlds and on the global stage. I feel Messi was very task oriented and Ronaldo was very ego. It was about him. Um, there's a there's something I heard recently. You either love the game or you love the ball. And you have to. There's no in between. And it took me a really long time. And actually, then I had a conversation with this gentleman that talked about it. And the love of the game is what you talk about. It's the task side and not the ego. And when you talk about the ego and on the world stage of football, sorry, I'll bounce between soccer and saying soccer and football. The task of these athletes, I personally think Ronaldo only cares about himself. It's how he looks. That's how he does with the game. When you watch someone like Messi, he's going to go beat the defender and slip the ball, pass the ball to someone else.
Yep.
Once he does his skill sets, all of his fancy work, and pass the ball out, because it's not about him scoring. It's about him doing his job to allow that person to score. Where Ronaldo was the opposite, I've always felt. And someone can argue with me. We can go argue all day long about this, but those are my two examples. And one's task, one's ego. But you have to have a fine balance between the two. So how do you discuss that with parents and the players then to find that balance? Because even at young ages, you have kids that are very ego driven. Look at me, and they didn't even do anything to win the game, or it's just that I was part of the group that won. And then you have the players that does everything correctly, doesn't boast, doesn't do anything. They just are there to play the game and to do their best. And they don't have the ego. So they don't showboat externally. They may talk about it internally, but then when they get home and they have a conversation with their parents, or the parents have a conversation with their players, like, why didn't you celebrate like everyone else? It's like, I was there to do a task. I accomplished my task, accomplished my goal, but they don't always show it. And I
Yep.
feel like kids need, I'm talking adolescents even, need to have that self-expression of, look what I just accomplished, but they don't need to be crazy about it either. Because we watch pro sports and you see players run to the corner now and do some type of skit type of thing. You see it in the NFL where they get into the end zone, they do some type of dance, whatever it may be. And kids see that and they want to emulate that. But at the end of the day, I personally don't think it's healthy, because it distracts from the game, because the beautifulness of the game. It doesn't matter the sport, but it also distracts from the talent of the player. So how do you teach to balance the two then? Because it's a fine line.
It is. It's a very fine line. And I think, I mean, gosh, the conversation could go on, but it does boil down to a few things, right?
Right.
Ego oriented athletes are under pressure to perform, right? And pressure is exactly what you make it. Practicing a penalty shot with your goalie at practice is essentially exactly the same as doing it when it counts in a game. The difference is the pressure. And so, what a task oriented athlete can do, because their mindset is open, because they're adaptive, because they're excited to learn from mistakes, is a task oriented athlete can still play to win. Whereas an ego oriented athlete, most of the time, will be playing not to lose, not to look bad. And the task oriented athlete is more adept to take chances and put themselves out there because they don't have that fear of failure cascading over them, right? I use the example all the time. I give a mental toughness talk to a group of people, and I say, if I put a 2x4 on the ground and I told you to walk across it, could you? Absolutely, right? No one's going to say I can't do that. Maybe you. You're laughing, but
My daughter does gymnastics, and this is a great example. They have a 4-inch beam that's literally 6 inches off the ground.
yep,
Then they put it 4 feet off the ground, and they all
yep,
struggle.
yep. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I put the same 2x4 between 200-story buildings. All of a sudden, I'm like, hey, who wants to walk across this? No one does. The task is exactly the same. Walk 1 foot in front of the other, but the consequences, either real or perceived, are different. Right? And ego oriented athletes view the consequences of failure as way more significant than a task oriented athlete. And I think it gets a little muddled, right? Like, as you were kind of talking it through it, I was I was giving my dissertation and I was talking about my theoretical orientation of performance excellence. And I sat there and I gave the proposal that, like, in order to be successful, you need to be task oriented and you should not be ego oriented. And I had one of my professors come back to me and said, well, sometimes there has to be ego orientation, right? When you're an athlete that is being paid for a result, right? You're a professional athlete, your career is based on wins or losses. You have to have a piece of that ego orientation. I disagree, because I think a task oriented athlete will win more games in the long run because they are freed up mentally from the shackles of pressure to perform, right? And that's pressure is such a hard thing, and there's levels of it that are good, there's levels of it that are positive. We all react differently to pressure. But I really, really feel strongly about this. And I really feel that once you're just focused on a result, you close yourself off to your ability to think and focus. And I use my own jujitsu competition journey as my self study in this. And the couple of tournaments that I've gone to with this little thought in my head of, oh, my coach expects me to win here, right? Like, I'm at Blue Belt Worlds and everyone from my gym thinks, oh, Tyler, you're going to win. You're so good. It really affects my performance. Whereas when I go and I say, I love jujitsu and I'm focused on the things that I can control, I do so well and I have so much fun with it, right? Which is the underlying of all of this. Like, that's what I would say to parents that are breathing down their kid's neck on the ride home saying, hey, here's all the mistakes you made. They're kids. They're supposed to have fun. Yeah, obviously we all have these athletic goals and dreams, but if you're not having fun, you've already taken away from what success is.
Now, going back, you talk about the pressures, and the old equation is makes diamonds, and athletes have to learn to perform under pressure from wins and losses, especially at the top level. And I think, since this is going to be after I get done with David's interview, he talked about there's two viewpoints of professional athletes.
Yep.
And he talks about the younger ages. And he talked about soccer, if you learn to enjoy the game at a younger age, and as you go through it and enjoy the game and learn to survive the game, when you are able to survive the game on the pitch and come off, you're fine. It's the next step when you go to that pro level, whatever it may be. It teaches you to have that foundation to move on from where you're at as a kid or a young adult playing a sport, but it prepares you to survive the business. I think that's the thing that parents need to understand, that we need to learn how to survive, to teach our players. They're not learning to survive to be a pro right now. They're learning to survive to play the game. And he
Yep.
talked about if we can teach our players to how to survive the game today. And I've actually talked to several players now that have said this to me. He talked about when he was going through his identity, he talked about identity,
Yep.
and players lose themselves, that they're only the soccer player, that they are not something more than, I'll use Landon, more than Landon the soccer player. He's Landon the big brother, Landon the son. He's possibly someday, whatever it may be, the significant other to someone else, whatever it may be, he is going to be the more than just Landon the soccer player. And the identity gets lost at a young age. And I feel as a parent, we are the primary contributors to this, because we don't teach them that they're more than just a soccer player or a student. And I think as parents, how do you advise them other than going to go do other activities? Because I'll take my 9-year-old. He doesn't want to do anything other than soccer. Soccer is his main love. It's his first thing. He gets up. We talk about soccer some mornings, or most mornings. If it's the weekends, especially if it's a school day, it's about getting ready for school. But when he gets home, it's talking about soccer or what he played at soccer at recess. My daughter talks about what handstand or whatever she's doing, cartwheels or roundoffs. That's what her love is. And she does talk some soccer because she does play soccer, but it is trying to teach them that they're more than just Landon the soccer player. But I feel as parents, we are the ones that are causing, because we put so much pressure, and that mental toughness side of it is that we make them lose their identity because of the mental toughness that, or the lack of mental toughness. So how do we teach our players to kind of like shift a little bit? And as parents, how do we shift our mindset on our players to be more I can't think of the word, more thoughtful of who our players are? Because I think the identity part is so critical, because if that before, I suffer from depression and I worry my kids will. And I worry that their identity, when their identity is gone of the soccer player or whatever, gymnastics or whatever it may be, or the love of their activity is gone, their identity will be gone and they'll be lost. And then depression can seek in, and all these other points of failures can creep in and really make them lose that life in general. I know that's horrible to say, but lose on being a productive member of society. And it goes, I'm not saying that they're doing a fail, but like you said, it's the what's used, your definition of mindfulness, living in the present without judgment, is teaching them how to do that. But how do we as parents teach them to live in the moment without judgment, but also realize they're more than that ball in the field or the activity they're doing? Like, what advice would you give parents then?
Yeah, so just to kind of give a background on athletic identity, right? Because that's a huge topic of conversation in sports psychology from the mental health perspective, right? Athletes that over identify and over conform to what it means to be a soccer player can lose a sense of what it means to be human. I personally believe that sports are such a good microcosm for life, right? You are learning skills in sports that are going to make you successful regardless of what you decide to do, right? Regardless of if you do decide to pursue that professional athletic, or you want to go, start a business or go to college, or anything. It's about the pieces, right? And it's funny, it's almost the same exact conversation that I have about, hey, let's praise the steps that your athlete took to get to the goal over the goal. How can you have a conversation with your athlete about the things that they do really well in sports that's not directly related to their sports performance, right? Hey, buddy, you are so dedicated to this. I love that you're able to put so much effort and energy into your love for soccer. And if for whatever reason you stop loving it, just know that you can apply that love and that inspiration to anything. And that skill of showing up and working hard will take you so far. One of the common cliche things that people say about jujitsu is jujitsu teaches you to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations, right? To have someone sitting with all of their body weight on top of you, trying to choke you out, trying to break your arm, and breathing and getting your body to respond. What a great life skill to have, right? So we take this microscope of sports and soccer, and this is all we do, and we start to broaden it out. And when you're having conversations with your kids about what they do well in sports, because I think, circling back to the conversation you had of the doom gloom ride home, where I'm just going to go and tell you all the negative things, it's like, no, reinforce positives. We are so hardwired already to look for negatives. We are survival machines. So even at a young age, we are conditioned to look more to the negative to the positive. Your kid is already beating themselves up for the mistakes that they made. They don't need mom and dad to tell them that too, right? They need someone to say, hey, we still love you, even though you didn't make that shot. And I think that's where even recently I had an intervention that I did with a youth athlete, and like we literally had to sit down and have the conversation of, I need to cognitively recognize that my dad still loves me if I miss a shot, because I'm so choked up right now and so afraid of missing, because I'm legitimately scared that my parent isn't going to love me anymore. And I think as the parent, if you're listening to this and you're hearing that, you're not like, oh my God, I could be doing that to my kid just by the way that I talk to them and the way I interact with them. It should be a huge red flag for you, right? And it's not anyone's fault. I think it's a cultural thing. I think it's kind of where our society is going, and just the state of things that we're in. But being able to still interact and have conversations with your kids on a whole, instead of just sports, right? Instead of just this little thing. Um, and I think too, when we get into the I am an athlete, I am a good athlete, it can be really limiting. And I think that was probably one of the most eye opening things that I discovered on my journey into sports psychology and on into mindset. There's a body of research by Dr. Carol Dweck that is called a fixed versus a growth mindset. And when I heard that, I really just assumed that a fixed mindset was a negative one, right? I can't do this. I'm not good. I don't have any skills. But she actually identified that statements such as, I'm smart or I am athletic, can also be a very fixed mindset place to be. So let's take I'm smart. That's an easy example to kind of use. If I say I'm smart and I raise my hand in class and I get an answer wrong, that is a threat to who I am and what I believe about myself. Because I believe I'm smart, and smart people shouldn't get this answer wrong. If I'm a soccer player and I'm athletic and my parents think I'm the star of the team, and that I'm going to get a free ride to college because I'm so good at this sport. And they're just going to, keep investing time, money, and energy into me to get better and better and better. That when I make a mistake, I feel that not just as something I did, but also as who I am. Anything that you can do to separate your child's athletic performance from who they think they are, right? Like, hey, let's start with the positives. Um, this is another great analogy that I use, right? Because I sometimes I hate positive psychology, right? Pop psychology says just think more positively and things will go great. Well, if I sit here and say I'm a millionaire, it doesn't put $1 million in my bank account, right? It might prime me to think and work that way, but it does not do the work to put the money in my bank account. So I am not the kind of sports psychologist that says just think everything's going to be awesome, and it will, because I'm a realist and sports are hard and life is hard and stuff's going to come up, right? It's going to be difficult. But if you think of positives and negatives like a sailboat, right? Your positives are your sail. They are what propel you forward. You are not going to go forward without thinking about the things that you're doing well. On the flip side, a negative is like having a hole in your boat, right? If you just completely ignore that and just go, oh, I'm going to think positively and everything's wonderful and I'm a great soccer player and I'm just going to tell myself I'm awesome. Well, if you ignore your weaknesses, you're going to go sinking. But if all you do is sit and plug the hole and plug the hole and plug the hole, you forget about your sales and you forget about forward momentum. So there's this weird space that's not blind positivity, that's not let's just focus on everything that we're doing wrong. It's realistic optimism, right? It's believing that things are going to get better because we're working on the things that we're not good at while still doubling down on the positives that take our game forward. And like cliche, stereotypical, whatever, but like the sandwich idea to criticism of like, hey, buddy, you did so good today. Here's the things that I saw you do really good. Maybe for that one play, you could have done this better. And then say, but I'm so proud of you and I love you, right? Because if you just go in and you berate these kids, they're going to think that they're worthless because they didn't play soccer well. And what kind of realistic view of life is that?
Right. And I think that goes back to, oh my goodness, I lost all my whole entire train of thought. Um, it goes back to what you were saying about, oh crud, the fix and growth mindset.
Yep.
It is the positive sandwich. I find that comical. I always start off with my son like, here's what I think you did wrong. I know it's mean to say, but like, here are the two things I know that you need to fix. Like, in time, I'm not expecting you to fix it in the next week. I expect you to fix it over the next season.
Yep.
Or the next 5 games, or work on it in practice this week and see if you can make it better in your next game. It is the long-term goals of, yes, you made a mistake doing this. Where was your mindset in the game? And the next question, then I give him all of his positives, and then we normally talk play by play, whatever he wants to talk about. Like the other night after practice, I asked him, "What do you want to do?" We get in the car. I go, "We can listen to the radio. We can talk about practice. We can talk about soccer. What do you want?" And I go, and he goes, "Let's talk about soccer." I go, "Okay." I go, "Do you want my opinion on today's practice or just soccer in general?" And he goes, "Practice, then we can talk soccer in general." And I've learned to not so much harp on him on all the things he does negative, but at the same time, we as parents invest a lot of time, emotions, and the financial side of it, especially when you get to the higher levels. I mean, thankfully, my son's only 9, so we aren't that heavily invested. But when you get to the next series, when he turns 13 and he's playing at the top level in the area, you're traveling 1 weekend a month out of state or 2 weekends a month out of state, and you have to pay for their airfare, their hotel, and their food while they're gone. And normally one parent will go with them. So it just triples the amount or quadruples the amount of cost. And we had the chat with him the other day. It's like, but if you're not going to do the things you need to be doing to get between the fix and growth, because you can have, like you said, you can have, I like the sailboat analogy. If he's not willing to fill his sails, so to speak, with doing the right things to momentum the boat, and like you said, he can't focus on all the time plugging the holes, the problems he's having, but finding the equal balance between the two, he'll be successful. But it comes back to the mental state of the player. And I feel like we as parents get so caught up in our own mental state of where we think our player should be, but we don't understand how to help them overcome the downfall. My greatest example of athlete growth for any athlete, it's a straight line that it's just a bunch of like little squiggles going around in circles. That it's up and down, left and right. It does not make any sense. And we as parents have to accept that our player might go through 6 months, 9 months of no growth or backward growth with their sports. And it's very hard to accept that as parents, because like you said, we are the driving cause for this perfectionism in our players. And if we just take a step back and let them be them, you might see some growth. And that's all you can ask for. But I lost my whole train of thought. I'm so sorry.
No, you're good.
But we as parents are, I feel like, are the hindering side of this. Now, you go back to the other side of this equation. Now, parents, we have more time with our players to help them. But we were told recently by my son's coach, and he laid it really out flat and dry to us. Until the age of about 14, until they start going through that puberty stage and going through those stages of life, about 9th grade, 15, 16 years old, 14, 15, 16 years old, they are so determined to, what's the word I'm looking for, to meet the demands of the people they look up to. So your parents, your coaches, teammates, and whoever it may be, that they only care about pleasing us. So if we talk negatively to our players and our players learn that they're negative in everything they do, they will only understand if they aren't being successful, they can't please. That we have to be positive. We have to reinforce this positive mindset into our players, and it has to come from the top down. But coaches have a
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Chat by the Pitch. This topic is dear to my heart because of my own personal anxiety, and as an athlete, I know this is a hard topic to talk about because you're letting your walls down. As parents, we need to be sympathetic and empathetic to our kids, letting them know that they're not alone in these feelings that they have. As athletes, they need to learn how to handle this. As I always tell my son, I got it from Matt Montaigne, it is your emotions affect your attitude affects your results. And as I think about that with mindfulness and mental toughness, this is such a huge part of this. It's how we control how we're feeling and going through the process and being able to recover. I think Soccer Dave talked about it in his episode a little bit, that the one great thing that he has as an individual trying to learn how to do a new skill is his ability to reset so quickly. And he talked about it in his episode. And I think that is part of that mindfulness and that mental toughness that we need to teach our kids. And Tyler talks so heavily about this in this episode. And as we get ready for next week's episode, I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I did. Re-listening to it and listening to this one, I feel like I talked way too much, and I apologize to that. I promise to get better with that. I hope you guys all enjoyed this episode. Hey everyone, if you guys have enjoyed this podcast, have enjoyed what I've been trying to do, the messages that I'm putting out there, please give me some ratings, some stars on all the podcast sites that you listen to this on. Give me a review, share this, share with others. The more I can make this grow, the more I can continue doing this. I'm really trying to make a difference in our soccer community. So I hope you guys have enjoyed all this. And until next time, I'll see you at the pitch.